Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Let's Learn Blades in the Dark. In this episode, we will continue our discussion of the action roll. So, as we discussed in the previous episode, the action roll involves a 6-step process. First, the player states their goal. Then, the player chooses the action rating they would like to use. Next, the GM sets the position. Then the GM sets the effect level, and finally, any bonus dice are added before the final roll is made and the result is judged. In the previous episode, we discussed the first 3 steps, and in this episode, we will discuss the final 3 steps. So we begin with step 4, the effect level. So this is similar to setting the position, as we discussed previously, but it is more complex than setting the position. The effect level can have either purely narrative consequences or mechanical consequences as well. So we'll get into why you might want to have purely narrative consequences or additional mechanical consequences. Simple obstacles are handled by the GM in the narrative. So if you have a great effect fighting the pirate, then maybe you just chop his head off in your attack. However, if you have limited effect, maybe you only disarm one of the weapons that he's holding. So that is a narrative consequence. Complex obstacles are additionally tracked by the GM in the form of clocks. So we'll get into discussing clocks later in this series. However, the important thing to note about them is that they are there to track progress and track the passing of time or the application of effect. So really, if you have a more complex situation, then you may want to use clocks in order to track the player's progress in overcoming the obstacle that they are faced with. So, effect in Blades in the Dark is used as a catch-all for consequences. And what I mean by that is that clocks and effects are used to track conflict with antagonist NPCs instead of HP. Okay, so in many games, antagonist NPCs, whether they're monsters or humans or what have you, are given HP as a way to track the player's progress in overcoming them as obstacles. However, in Blades in the Dark, you simply use a clock for this purpose, just like you would use for any kind of opposition in the game. So if you are trying to unlock a particularly complex lock system, you use a clock to track that. If you are trying to overcome an experienced duelist, you use a clock to track that. If you are trying to swim across a channel in a restricted amount of time, you can use a clock to track that. So the effect system is an abstracted pacing mechanic that covers all opposition in the game. So this is quite a radical departure that Blades of the Dark takes from some other games. And it continues the design style of unifying abstractions. So we saw in the previous video that the action roll is used to capture all forms of action in the game. And you will see that the effect system and the clock system that interfaces with it is used to track all opposition in the game. So there's really this tendency in the design of Blades in the Dark to create large, internally complex abstractions or functions that capture all kinds of different situations. So clocks are advanced by effect levels in the following ways. So we talk about how they are able to track progress, and the following effect levels have the following advancements. So a great effect has 3 ticks on a clock, standard effect 2 ticks, and a limited effect 1 tick. So this is standardized it's not arbitrary on the GM side. What the GM decides is the effect of the PC action, not not how many ticks the PC gets. That is standard and known to both the PC or to both the players and the GM. So determining effect level is the GM's responsibility. And how they should go about that. Well, first they should check their gut feeling, right? So how does it feel? Does shooting someone with a cannon feel like it has great effect or limited effect? Well, probably great effect. That's just a gut check. You can feel that. Then you consider the following assessing factors. So potency, particular weakness of an obstacle to the player. So maybe the obstacle the player is facing is, again, a very complex lock, but the player has prepared a specially constructed bomb that will blow out the lock. And, well, then maybe the lock is particularly weak to the player's approach. Quality or tier. So the use of tools, weapons, or other resources of some particular tier or quality. So what that means is fine weapons give you additional effect levels. And crew tier versus opposing faction tier. So again, the tier is another system that we will talk about in a later video. But essentially this means, is the player up against a faction that is stronger or weaker than them? That will have an influence on the effect level that they can get in their action roll. Next, there is the scale, the number or size of the obstacle. So again, going back to the cannon example, so if the player is shooting a flimsy wooden hut with a cannon, well, that would probably have great effect. However, if the player is shooting a gigantic castle or fortress with a cannon, that might have limited effect. So that has to do with the scale of the obstacle. Alright, so next we get on to modifying the effect assessment. So the effect level can be reduced below limited to 0 effect or increased beyond great to extreme effect. So as we said, these kinds of assessing factors can alter the effect assessment. And if, the player is up against, say, a faction that is a much higher tier than them, then maybe their effect is actually reduced in the assessment down to 0 effect. Or, alternatively, if they have all kinds of advantages, they can get beyond great effect to extreme effect. And in case you're wondering, that does mean that the clock would tick 4 times if the action is successful. PC special abilities are added after the assessment. So after the GM makes the assessment, then the PC special abilities are added. So some PC special abilities will allow, in certain circumstances, for the PC to increase their effect level. So the 0 effect can go to limited with a +1, or for 2 stress, the PC can take +1 effect. So yeah, that's another way to increase effect, is through spending stress. Alright, so trading position for effect. Position can be traded for effect after the effect level has been set by the GM. So again, similar to the application of bonuses, first the GM makes the determination, then these kinds of bargaining and consideration processes can kick in. So trading position for effect, what does that mean? Well, it should only be done if it can be justified in the fiction, and an example of trading position for effect is, say, taking greater effect, as in the distance the player achieves, in running through a guarded area by desperately running as fast as possible. So this is an example that's in the book. The GM says, well, if you run, you can only make it halfway to your destination. So that means you only get limited effect. Well, but if you want to make your situation desperate by very conspicuously running as fast as you can, then you can get a greater effect, right? So you're increasing the severity of your situation, worsening your position in exchange for a better effect. Alternatively, you can take a limited effect, for example, goods stolen, in stealing only the mission target so as to maintain a controlled position. So if you're going into a room, grabbing only the thing that you need to complete your mission, and ignoring all the riches that surround it so as to get in and out as fast as possible, you could be improving your position by giving yourself a more limited effect. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer. Basically, there's a trade-off between position and effect that can be negotiated between the GM and the players. So what is the purpose of tracking a position and effect? Well, John Harper provides some clear explanation of this. He says, by assessing effect and describing it in the fiction, the players understand how much progress they're making and how much they're risking. By understanding effect, the group understands how many actions and risks of consequences will be needed to achieve their goals. After each instance of action, effect, and consequences, the player knows where they stand and can make informed decisions about what to do next. So really, you go through each of these procedures, and that helps to flesh out the situation and also to track the progress of the situation in a way that both the player and the GM can understand, so that the conversation of the game can proceed smoothly without confusion on either side. Alright, so next we get on to step 5, adding bonus dice. So one bonus die can be received from a teammate if the teammate spends 1 stress. It's pretty simple. This is in addition to the bonus die you can receive from a teammate. 1 bonus die for the PC pushing themselves, so that's 2 stress. So if the PC spends 2 stress, they can get a bonus die for themselves. If their teammate spends 1 stress, they can give a bonus die to the PC. So that can give 2 bonus dice to the PC together. However, instead of pushing themselves, the PC can choose to take a devil's bargain for a bonus die. So there are 2 ways that the PC can improve their odds by taking bonus dice. Their teammate can always only use the one avenue to improve their position by spending 1 stress. So let's get into the devil's bargain. Devil's bargain is like the hard bargain in PBTA games. So if you're familiar with PBTA games, sometimes on a 7 to 9 result, which is a mixed success, the GM will be able to give the player a hard bargain. Basically, you get something you want, however, there is a complication that is involved. And the difference here is that the player opts in to this, right? The player opts in. It's not something that is the consequence of a dice roll. It's something that the player can ask for or the GM can offer, but is never compelled upon the player. The GM or any other player can offer a devil's bargain. So it's not the responsibility solely of the GM to provide suggestions for a devil's bargain. And you can also see the devil's bargain as quite similar to asking the dark powers for assistance in the Burning Wheel. You can get extra dice to do something if you agree to take corruption by requesting the help of the dark powers. So literally a devil's bargain. But in this case, it's a little bit more metaphorical. So some options for devil's bargains that the players or the GM can suggest include collateral damage or unintended harm, sacrificing coin, so that's the resources of the team, or an item, betraying a friend or a loved one, offending or angering a faction, starting or ticking a troublesome clock, adding heat to the crew from evidence or witnesses, suffering harm, or suffering harm. So the thing is, when you look through this list, you can see all of these different systems that are in the game and can be engaged in order to basically complicate the situation that the crew finds themselves in, especially the PC finds themselves in. So it could be narrative things, or it can be mechanical things like coin, faction relationships, clocks, heat, or harm. So continuing the discussion of the Devil's Bargain. Devil's Bargains can involve some rewriting of the situation. Usually this involves the revealing of a complicating detail, such as, among the group of bandits that you were fighting, one of them reveals themselves to be your long lost cousin, right? So it's an additional detail is added to the situation that was not announced at the beginning of the description of the situation. And, the players and the GM can get creative with this. However, if you don't like this kind of thing, you can also opt to not use it in your game. The negative complication happens regardless of whether or not the roll succeeds on a Devil's Bargain. So if you take the Devil's Bargain, you accept the negative consequence, whether or not the roll succeeds. You can't fail the roll and then say, you can't get a miss and then say, oh, no, I don't want to miss and have the consequence of the Devil's Bargain. That's too much. Can I go back on that? No, you can't. So as John Harper writes, you make the deal, you pay the price, you get the bonus die. The Devil's Bargain can always be rejected by the player, and the GM has final say on if a proposal for one is valid. So again, this is before rolling, right? So the PC can listen to an offer for Devil's Bargain and say, no, I'm just going to take my chances without the Devil's Bargain. I'm going to spend stress to get a bonus die instead of taking a Devil's Bargain. That option is always available to the player as long as they haven't rolled yet. Once they make their roll, well, sorry, but you made the Devil's Bargain. You have to pay the consequences. And finally, the GM gets to say if a proposal for one is valid. So you can't have one person among the players say, oh, Devil's Bargain, let's see, I'll give you an extra die if you get a fluffy bunny for your birthday in this situation, right? That's no consequence. The GM can just say, no. No, we need to make life complicated for the PC for this to be a Devil's Bargain, right? So GM is the arbiter of whether a Devil's Bargain proposal is valid, even if they don't have exclusive responsibility to come up with proposals. All right, so finally, step 6, roll dice and judge results. So after rolling dice, refer to the tables for outcomes and consequences. So this is in the book of the game. Basically, depending on your position and effect, you get different outcomes and consequences. And you really need to refer to the tables to get into the details of that. So that's where you go to resolve. And a miss can succeed at a heavy cost. This hard move can be done if the position of the move allows it. So depending on your position, or the player's position, there are situations where even a miss can provide a success at a cost. However, if you're in a desperate limited situation, you are definitely going to have some badness if you miss, right? So you have to refer to those tables in order to see what the outcome is. And NPCs never make action rolls. So this is something that I just wanted to clarify. If the NPC is the obstacle, they succeed on a PC failure and vice versa. So this is something often called player-facing rolls. Basically, the GM is not rolling for the NPCs to make action rolls, to do things to the player. It is when the players put themselves in difficult positions relative to the NPCs and miss that they suffer consequences, right? They just take harm, or something they hold dear is lost because of what the NPCs do. The NPCs are not protagonists of the game in the same way that the PCs are. they react to player failures. All right, so in the next episode, we are going to get into those results by talking about consequences and harm, and I will see you then.